Good morning, and welcome to the Daily Signal. I'm your host, Remo, and it's Monday, June 2nd, 2025. Today, we're tracking a world on edge, from overnight Ukrainian drone strikes that lit up Russian skies to peace talks that could reshape the conflict entirely. We'll explore how a surprising election result in Poland might alter the entire European response to Ukraine, and why the UK is ramping up submarine production in preparation for what they're calling war-fighting readiness. But it's not all about conflict today. We're also following Greta Thunberg's bold new mission as she joins a Gaza aid flotilla, the tragic death of a businessman at a luxury safari lodge that serves as a stark reminder of nature's power, and why the battle over AI copyright is reaching a boiling point with no solution in sight. From the corridors of power in Asia, where Defense Secretary Hegseth is delivering stern warnings about China, to the latest developments in Gaza, where new military tactics are changing the landscape, we've got the stories that matter, explained in ways that make sense. Let's dive in. Our top story takes us to the skies over Russia, where overnight Ukrainian drone attacks sparked fires and disrupted highway traffic across multiple regions. These weren't random strikes. Ukrainian forces targeted infrastructure deep inside Russian territory, continuing a strategy that's becoming increasingly bold. Reports from the Moscow Times indicate that fires broke out at several facilities, while major highways were temporarily shut down as emergency crews responded to the attacks. What makes this significant? This represents Ukraine's growing capability to project power far beyond its borders, even as it fights a defensive war on its own soil. For Russian civilians, these attacks bring the reality of war directly to their doorstep, something that wasn't happening in the early stages of this conflict. The international community is watching closely because these deep strike capabilities could either pressure Russia toward negotiations or escalate the conflict further. For now, it shows that Ukraine isn't just surviving, it's actively taking the fight to its opponent. Speaking of shifting dynamics, Poland just delivered a political earthquake that could reshape Europe's entire approach to the Ukraine conflict. A Trump ally has been elected to a key position, and the implications stretch far beyond Poland's borders. Now, you might wonder why one election in Poland matters so much. Here's the thing. Poland has been one of Ukraine's strongest supporters, providing weapons, hosting refugees, and pushing the entire European Union toward a harder line against Russia. This new election result signals a potential shift toward the kind of America First foreign policy we saw during Trump's presidency. That could mean less enthusiasm for continued military aid to Ukraine and more pressure for quick diplomatic solutions, even if those solutions favor Russia. For the EU, this creates a massive headache. Unity on Ukraine policy has been their strength. If Poland, a major player, starts pulling in a different direction, it could fracture that unity just when Ukraine needs European support most. The ripple effects could extend to NATO strategies and even future US-Europe cooperation. But here's an intriguing twist in our Ukraine coverage. Russia and Ukraine are reportedly set to hold more peace talks, and this comes right after Kyiv struck Russian nuclear-capable bombers. Let that sink in for a moment. Ukraine just demonstrated it can reach Russia's most strategic military assets, and now both sides are talking about sitting down for negotiations. That's not a coincidence. Military analysts suggest that Ukraine's strike on nuclear-capable bombers was a calculated message: we can reach your most sensitive targets. Meanwhile, Russia might be reconsidering its position as these long-range attacks prove more effective than expected. Peace talks in wartime are always complicated. Both sides typically negotiate from positions they believe show strength. Ukraine's recent successes with long-range strikes give them leverage they didn't have before. Russia, facing infrastructure damage and international isolation, might be more willing to make concessions. Of course, we've seen peace talks before in this conflict that led nowhere. But the timing, right after such a significant Ukrainian capability demonstration, suggests these might be different. Now let's shift to Britain, where the government just announced plans to build up to 12 new submarines as part of what they're calling a shift to war-fighting readiness. This isn't just about buying a few more ships. This represents a fundamental change in how Britain sees its role in an increasingly unstable world. The submarine program will take years to complete and cost billions, showing this is about long-term strategic thinking, not just current conflicts. Why submarines? In modern warfare, submarines are like the ultimate insurance policy. They can operate unseen, strike from unexpected directions, and survive even if surface fleets are destroyed. For an island nation like Britain, submarine capability is especially crucial. This announcement comes as NATO allies are all increasing defense spending, largely in response to Russian aggression and growing concerns about China's military expansion. Britain is essentially saying, we're preparing for a world where military strength determines diplomatic outcomes. For taxpayers, this means significant defense spending increases. For Britain's allies, it signals renewed commitment to collective defense at a time when that commitment really matters. Moving to the Middle East, BBC Verify is tracking what they're calling a mass casualty incident involving Gaza aid distribution. The details are still emerging, but early reports suggest civilian casualties occurred during aid distribution operations. These incidents highlight one of the most challenging aspects of humanitarian work in conflict zones. Aid organizations are trying to get food, medicine, and supplies to civilians who desperately need them, but they're operating in an active war zone where the situation can turn deadly in seconds. What makes this particularly tragic is that these appear to be people who were simply trying to access basic necessities. When aid distribution becomes dangerous, it creates an impossible situation. Civilians need help, but getting that help puts them at risk. The international community has been pushing for safe corridors and protected aid distribution, but implementing these protections in practice proves incredibly difficult. Each incident like this makes the humanitarian crisis worse, not just because of the immediate casualties, but because it makes people afraid to seek help even when it's available. We'll continue tracking this story as more verified information becomes available. On a completely different note, a tragic reminder of nature's unpredictability comes from Namibia, where a businessman was killed by a lion at a luxury safari lodge after stepping out of his tent to use the toilet. This incident serves as a sobering reminder that even at high-end safari destinations with extensive safety protocols, wildlife encounters can turn deadly in an instant. The victim was staying at what's described as a luxury lodge. These aren't budget camping trips, but expensive experiences with professional guides and safety measures. Safari tourism is crucial for many African economies and wildlife conservation efforts. The fees from luxury lodges fund anti-poaching operations and provide economic incentives for local communities to protect rather than hunt wildlife. But incidents like this highlight the inherent risks involved when humans venture into the natural habitats of apex predators. For the safari industry, each tragedy raises difficult questions about how to balance authentic wildlife experiences with tourist safety. Shifting to technology, the AI copyright standoff continues with no solution in sight, creating headaches for everyone from tech companies to individual creators. Here's the problem. AI systems learn by analyzing massive amounts of existing content, books, articles, artwork, music. But much of that content is copyrighted, and the creators never gave permission for their work to be used this way. Think of it like this. Imagine someone photocopied your original artwork thousands of times to teach a robot how to paint, then sold the robot's paintings without ever asking your permission or paying you a dime. That's essentially what's happening, but with computer code instead of photocopiers. The stakes are enormous. If courts decide AI companies must pay for every piece of copyrighted material they use for training, it could fundamentally change how AI development works. If they don't, it could devastate entire creative industries as AI-generated content floods the market. Meanwhile, creators are watching AI systems produce content that seems suspiciously similar to their work, while tech companies argue they're protected by fair use provisions that cover research and development. From Asia, Defense Secretary Hegseth is delivering stern warnings about China during his regional tour, but Washington Post reports that few countries want to pick sides in this growing rivalry. This reflects one of the biggest challenges in modern geopolitics. The United States wants its allies to take strong positions against Chinese expansion, particularly in the South China Sea and regarding Taiwan. But many Asian nations have complex relationships with both superpowers. Take countries like Singapore or Thailand. They rely on U.S. security guarantees, but also depend heavily on Chinese trade and investment. Forcing them to choose sides could hurt their economies and security simultaneously. Hegseth's warnings about Chinese military expansion are based on real concerns. China's military buildup is unprecedented, and its territorial claims are increasingly aggressive. But Asian nations see this as an American problem that Washington wants them to solve. The challenge for U.S. foreign policy is convincing allies that Chinese expansion threatens them directly, not just American interests. Without that conviction, building effective coalitions against Chinese influence becomes nearly impossible. In a surprising development, climate activist Greta Thunberg has joined a Gaza flotilla aimed at breaking the Israeli naval blockade. This represents a significant expansion of Thunberg's activism beyond climate issues. Thunberg's participation brings massive international attention to the flotilla, though it also risks controversy that could overshadow the humanitarian mission. Her global platform means media coverage that these aid efforts wouldn't normally receive. The flotilla aims to deliver humanitarian supplies to Gaza, challenging the naval blockade that Israel maintains for security reasons. Previous similar efforts have resulted in confrontations at sea, diplomatic incidents, and sometimes violence. For Thunberg personally, this represents a broadening of her activism into areas beyond climate change. She's increasingly positioning herself as a voice for global justice issues, not just environmental protection. The Israeli government faces a difficult decision. Stopping the flotilla could create negative headlines worldwide, especially with Thunberg aboard, but allowing it through could be seen as weakening the blockade they consider essential for national security. Finally, explosions from Gaza were heard in central Israel after the Israeli Defense Forces introduced what they're calling a new tactic in their operations. While specific details about this new tactic remain classified for obvious security reasons, the fact that explosions are being heard as far away as central Israel suggests either larger-scale operations or new types of weaponry being employed. This development indicates that the conflict's intensity isn't decreasing, despite ongoing international pressure for de-escalation. For Israeli civilians hearing these explosions, it's a reminder that the conflict's effects extend far beyond the immediate combat zones. The introduction of new military tactics often signals either desperation or confidence. Either side feels pressed to try something different, or they believe they've found an advantage worth exploiting. As we wrap up today's Daily Signal, several themes emerge from our global news roundup. From Ukraine's expanding strike capabilities to Britain's submarine buildup, from AI copyright battles to diplomatic complexities in Asia, we're seeing a world where old rules are being tested and rewritten. Perhaps most striking is how interconnected these stories really are. Poland's election affects European unity on Ukraine. Ukraine's military success influences peace talk prospects. China's rise complicates U.S. alliances. AI development challenges creative industries worldwide. Each story we've covered today will continue evolving, creating new challenges and opportunities in the days ahead. That's why staying informed matters. Not just knowing what happened, but understanding how these events connect and what they mean for all of us. Thank you for joining me on the Daily Signal. I'm Remo, and I'll be back tomorrow with the stories shaping our world. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and take care.